watched my best friend get wheeled into that operating room, and I didn't say a single word to stop it. Not because I was afraid. Not because I didn't know what was about to happen inside those doors. I stayed silent because the last time I tried to save her, it cost me everything. My career, my name, my life, and she was the one who handed the knife to the people who destroyed me. Let me back up. My name is Nadia Coles, 31 years old, and I have lived this exact day before. I died on a Tuesday in November. Cardiac arrest, they said. Stress-induced, they said. What they didn't say, what no one ever said out loud, was that the woman crying the loudest at my funeral was the same woman who spent 2 years slowly, quietly, methodically making sure I had nothing left to live for, my best friend, my sister, in everything but blood. Maya, when I opened my eyes and found myself back in my own body. 3 years earlier, standing in the middle of the hospital hallway, I swore I'd never enter again. My first instinct was to scream her name, to run, to warn her, but then I remembered something I wasn't supposed to know until it was too late, and I pressed my back against that cold white wall, folded my hands together, and I waited. Because this time, I wasn't going to save Maya from the surgery. I was going to let her walk straight into the trap she helped build for me, and I was going to watch every single person in that room finally see who she really was. If you've ever trusted someone with your whole heart and had them burn it to the ground while smiling at your face, stay with me. Because this story doesn't end with me crying. If this kind of story keeps you up at night, hit subscribe. We drop new episodes every week, and trust me, you don't want to miss what comes next. 3 years ago, I was the best surgical resident at Mercy General Hospital. Not the most popular, not the most liked, but the best. My attending knew it, the chief of staff knew it. And Maya, my best friend of 11 years, knew it better than anyone, because she was standing right next to me every single step of the way. Or so I thought. Maya and I had started med school together. We studied in the same cramped apartment, survived the same brutal rotations, cried over the same failed exams. She was the one who held my hand when my mother passed. I was the one who sat with her through every ugly breakup, every panic attack, every 3 a.m. meltdown. We weren't just friends. We were each other's proof that we were going to make it. That's the part that made the betrayal so clean, so surgical. Because when the moment came for only one of us to get the senior fellowship, the one that came with research funding, a published name, and a direct path to attending, Maya didn't fight fair. She didn't have to. She already had everything she needed. She had access to my files, my research notes, my patient case documentation that I had spent 14 months building from scratch. And she had a friendship with Dr. Harlan Voss, the head of the fellowship committee, that I had always chalked up to professional admiration. It wasn't admiration, I know that now. The committee announcement came on a Wednesday morning. I remember the exact lighting in that hallway. Fluorescent, cold, humming faintly overhead. Dr. Voss read the name from a sheet of paper without even looking up. Maya Chen. And the room applauded. I told myself it was fine. I told myself I must have missed something. I told myself that Maya had worked just as hard, that maybe her submission was stronger, that the process was fair. I told myself that for 6 more months, while Maya's career launched like a rocket and mine quietly, invisibly began to fall apart. First, it was the small things. My patient recommendations getting misrouted, my research requests getting delayed, my name left off a joint paper I had co-authored. Little paper cuts, the kind you barely notice until you've already bled out. Then it got louder. An anonymous complaint filed against me with the medical board. Allegations of improper patient documentation. An investigation that dragged my name through every corridor of that hospital. I fought it. I submitted everything I had. I begged Maya, my best friend, my witness, the one person who knew exactly how meticulous I was, to speak up for me. She cried. She hugged me. She said she would do anything to help. She testified against me, not with a scream, not with cruelty, with a soft voice and sad eyes and carefully chosen words that made me sound unstable, careless, and dangerous, and made her look like a reluctant, heartbroken friend who had no choice but to tell the truth. I lost my position. My license was suspended pending review. I spent the next 2 years fighting a system that had already decided I was guilty, and somewhere in the middle of all that fighting, my body just gave up. Cardiac arrest, a Tuesday in November, and now I am back. Standing in this hallway, 3 years earlier, my license still intact, my research still mine. Maya still smiling at me from across the nurse's station like the world is whole and clean and simple. She doesn't know what I know. She doesn't know that I found the emails. In my last life, 2 weeks before I died, I found them buried in a forwarded file that was never meant to reach me. Emails between Maya and Dr. Voss. Detailed, strategic. Going back almost a year before the fellowship announcement. She hadn't just beaten me, she had planned it, but here's the part I haven't told you yet. The part that changed everything about how I decided to play this second chance. Maya wasn't just after the fellowship. She was after something that had nothing to do with medicine at all. And the surgery Shaz about to have? She thinks it's going to save her life. She has no idea it's the beginning of the end. That's the hardest part to explain to someone who hasn't lived through what I lived through. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to move, to act, to pull Maya aside and confront her before a single domino could fall. But I had already learned, the painful way, the fatal way, that confronting Maya head-on was exactly what she wanted. She was good at being cornered. She was better at being believed. So instead of reacting, I observed. I watched the way she laughed a half-second too long when Dr. Voss walked into a room. I watched the way her eyes tracked me when she thought I wasn't looking. Not with guilt, but with calculation. Like I was a variable she was constantly measuring, a problem she was always one step ahead of solving. The old Nadia never noticed that. The old Nadia was too busy trusting her. I noticed everything now. The first smart move I made was with my research. In my previous life, I had kept all my fellowship documentation on the shared hospital server. Accessible, organized, and completely unprotected because I had no reason to believe someone inside my own circle would steal it. This time, I transferred everything to an encrypted private drive within my first week back. Every case note, every data set, every draft, time-stamped, backed up, and completely out of Maya's reach. She didn't react right away, but I caught the exact moment she tried to access the shared folder and found it empty. She came to me that afternoon with coffee and a smile. "Hey, I was looking for the Thompson case file. You moved it?" "Yeah," I said, taking the coffee like I had no idea what she was really asking. "I am reorganizing my system. You know how I am," she laughed. "Total control freak, always," I said, and I smiled right back at her. What she didn't know was that I had already installed a document tracking log on the shared server 3 days earlier. A quiet little program that recorded every access attempt, every file opened, every search query entered under any user ID. Maya had searched my name 47 times in the past week alone. That number told me everything. She wasn't just ambitious, she was already running the play, which meant the fellowship application window was already on her radar, which meant I had less time than I thought. I moved my second piece quietly. I requested a private meeting with Dr. Eleanor Marsh, the one committee member Dr. Voss had never been able to fully influence, the woman who had always been fair to me in my previous life and whose opinion he worked carefully to isolate. In my last timeline, I had never spoken to her outside of formal settings. I had been too focused on my work, too naive about the politics. This time, I brought her coffee, sat across from her, and talked about her research, her actual research, which I had read cover to cover the night before. I wasn't performing, I was building something real. By the end of that meeting, Dr. Marsh looked at me differently, not like a resident, like a colleague. I could see Maya watching us through the glass wall of the conference room. Good, let her watch, but here's where the story takes a turn I wasn't fully prepared for, even with everything I already knew. That evening, I was leaving the hospital when I overheard a conversation I was never meant to hear. 2 voices, low and tense, coming from the stairwell near the east exit. One voice was Dr. Voss, the other one stopped me cold. It wasn't Maya, it was someone I had never once suspected, someone whose name I had never connected to any of this, someone who had been kind to me, generous to me, present in my life in a way that had always felt safe. And they were talking about me. Not about the fellowship, not about the research. They were talking about my mother. I didn't move, I didn't breathe. I pressed myself against the wall outside that stairwell door, and I listened to every single word like my life depended on it, because somewhere deep in my chest, I already knew that it did. Dr. Voss was speaking in that low, controlled tone he used when he wanted to sound calm but was actually unraveling. I knew that voice. I had heard it once before. In my previous life, right before he signed off on the complaint that ended my career. "She's getting too close to Marsh," he said. "If Marsh starts pulling her work into the review committee, we have a problem." The other voice responded, careful, measured, and heartbreakingly familiar. "Then we move faster. We always knew this was a possibility." It was Dr. Raymond Cole, my mother's doctor. The man who had treated her for 3 years. The man who had sat across from me in consultation rooms, handed me tissue boxes, explained treatment plans in soft and patient language while I nodded and signed every form he put in front of me. The man I had trusted completely because he was the last thread connecting me to my mother's final months. My hands were shaking. I pressed them flat against the wall. "The girl doesn't know," Voss said. "She never looked at the original biopsy reports." "No," Raymond said. "She trusted me." And there it was. 4 words that ripped open something I hadn't even known was wounded. I had always believed my mother's death was a tragedy. A fast-moving illness, a late diagnosis, a cruel twist of biology. I had grieved it as something random and devastating and no one's fault. But standing in that hallway, I suddenly remembered something I had dismissed 11 years ago as administrative confusion. When my mother passed, there had been a brief, quiet dispute about her original biopsy results, a discrepancy between the initial report and the second review. The hospital had called it a clerical error. Raymond had called it a clerical error. And I, 20 years old, exhausted and destroyed by grief, had believed him. I believed him because Maya had told me to. "Don't dig into it, Nadia. It'll only make the pain worse. Raymond is one of the best." Let her rest. I had let her rest, but now I was understanding. Slowly, sickeningly, like ice water spreading through my chest, that my mother's misdiagnosis wasn't a clerical error. The delayed treatment wasn't an accident, and Raymond Cole hadn't just been my mother's doctor. He was Harlan Voss' oldest friend. The connection I was building in my mind was almost too ugly to complete, but I completed it anyway, because the version of me that looked away from ugly things was dead and buried. My mother had been a medical malpractice attorney, brilliant, aggressive, and in the final year of her life, quietly building a case against Mercy General Hospital for a pattern of negligent diagnoses in the oncology department. A case that would have named Harlan Voss specifically. She died before she could file it. And 3 years later, her daughter, the one who had inherited her files, her instincts, and her last name, started rising fast inside the very hospital her mother had been about to expose. I wasn't just a rival to Maya. I was a threat they had never stopped watching. The fellowship, my destroyed career, the board complaint. None of it was about professional jealousy. It was about making sure I never had the credibility, the platform, or the protected status to go digging into the past. Maya hadn't just betrayed me for ambition. Someone had been feeding her reasons to. I walked out of that hospital into the cold night air and stood on the sidewalk until my breathing steadied. Then I took out my phone and called the one person I had been saving for exactly this moment. My mother's former law partner, the woman who had always believed the case wasn't finished. She picked up on the second ring. "I need to meet with you," I said. "I found something, and this time, I have proof." Her name was Constance Webb, 70 years old, sharp as a blade, and the kind of woman who kept files the way other people kept grudges, permanently and with perfect organization. She had worked alongside my mother for 12 years. She had stood at her funeral with dry eyes and clenched fists, which I had mistaken for coldness at the time. It wasn't coldness, it was fury she hadn't finished using yet. When I sat across from her in her home office and laid out everything, the stairwell conversation, the biopsy discrepancy, the connection between Raymond Cole and Harlan Voss, the timeline of my mother's case, Constance didn't look surprised. She looked relieved. "I've been waiting 11 years for someone to walk through that door," she said. She opened a drawer and placed a thick manila folder on the desk between us. Inside were the original documents my mother had been building her case around. Constance had preserved every single page. Internal hospital memos, patient outcome patterns, a private letter from Voss to the board, dated 6 weeks before my mother's diagnosis worsened, requesting that her treatment protocol be quietly reassigned. Reassigned to Raymond Cole, I sat with that information for a long time without speaking. My mother hadn't just been failed by the system. She had been deliberately, strategically slowed down. Not killed outright. Nothing that clean. Just delayed, confused, rerouted through enough bureaucratic fog that by the time anyone treated her aggressively, it was already too late. And the woman who had told me not to dig into it, the woman who had held my hand at the funeral and whispered, "Let her rest," had known Raymond Cole personally for 3 years before my mother ever became his patient. I drove home that night, and I sat in my dark apartment, and I let myself feel it. All of it. The grief I had carried for 11 years under the wrong label. Loss, not injustice. Tragedy, not crime. Then I put it down, and I got to work. The next 4 weeks moved like a controlled demolition. Quiet on the surface. Catastrophic underneath. Constance filed a formal request with the state medical board to reopen the review of my mother's case, citing newly surfaced documentation. She kept my name completely out of it. As far as anyone at Mercy General knew, it was the random resurgence of an old complaint from a retired attorney. But Voss knew. I could see it the moment the news hit the hospital grapevine. The color left his face in a meeting I happened to be walking past. He excused himself early. He spent the rest of the afternoon behind a closed door. Raymond Cole called in sick the following day, and Maya, brilliant, calculating Maya, suddenly started making mistakes. Small ones at first, a missed notation on a patient chart, an unusually flustered response during rounds. She was distracted, and I knew why. Whoever had been feeding her information from above was now too busy drowning to keep her updated. She came to me on a Thursday afternoon, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, she looked uncertain. "Have you heard anything about this medical board thing?" she asked, keeping her voice casual. "Some old case getting reopened?" "No," I said, not looking up from my chart. "Should I have?" She watched me for a moment too long. "No," she said finally. "Just hospital noise. But that evening I received something that shifted the entire board. An anonymous message, encrypted, sent to a private email address that only 4 people in the world knew existed, one of whom was Constance, one of whom was my mother, and one of whom was supposed to be dead. The message contained a single file attachment. Security footage, Mercy General Hospital, dated the week of my mother's final consultation. It showed Raymond Cole in a private hallway, handing a sealed envelope to a woman in a gray coat. I enlarged the image until her face was unmistakable. It wasn't Maya, it was someone standing at the very top of everything, someone whose exposure wouldn't just end careers. It would end the hospital itself. The woman in the gray coat was Dr. Patricia Hale, Chief of Staff at Mercy General Hospital. 22 years in that position, the most decorated, most photographed, most publicly celebrated figure in the entire institution. Her portrait hung in the main lobby. Her name was on the children's wing. She gave commencement speeches about ethics and integrity, and the sacred duty of medicine. And 11 years ago, she had paid Raymond Cole to make sure my mother's case never reached a courtroom. The envelope in the footage, Constance confirmed it within 48 hours, contained the first of 3 payments. A private arrangement buried inside a shell consulting company that had been dormant for over a decade. Constance's financial investigator found it in 6 days. 6 days to unravel something they had spent 11 years believing was invisible. Arrogance is its own kind of blindness. They never imagined someone would actually come back for this. I brought everything to Constance. She brought it to the state attorney's office. I didn't ask to be in the room. I didn't need the credit. I just needed it done. The morning the investigation went official and the subpoenas landed, I was standing at the nurse's station when Harlan Voss walked into the hospital and was met at the door by 2 men in suits who were not his colleagues. I watched his face go through 5 different expressions in under 3 seconds. Confusion, recognition, disbelief. And finally, something I had waited a very long time to see. Fear. Raymond Cole had already lawyered up by noon. Patricia Hale released a statement by 2 p.m., calling the allegations deeply troubling and entirely without merit, which is what people say when the merit is overwhelming. Maya found me in the break room at the end of that shift. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. The polish was gone. The careful, practiced warmth she wore like a second skin had finally slipped, and underneath it she just looked tired and exposed and smaller than I had ever seen her. "Nadia," she said, "I need you to know I didn't know about your mother. I didn't know what they did to her. I looked at her for a long time. I know.